Hello, everybody, and welcome back to our Food for Life series, where we're talking to Rachel Farr again this morning from Cae Rhug Holistic Farm outside of Mould. Rachel, as we know, has been doing a huge amount of good with regards to what she's been growing over the years in her own gardens. And also for the community. And what we're going to do today is talk to Rachel a little bit about what you can be doing in your own gardens in preparation for the coming growing seasons between now and March, and also March onwards. As we know, there's been a bit of a spike in terms of people's enthusiasm for Grow Your Own over the last few months, especially in view of the pandemic. People have turned back to growing their own vegetables and fruits in their own back gardens. What we wanted to touch on was when and where we can actually buy our seeds in preparation for planting between now and the spring. So if you could give us a little bit of an insight in terms of now.
Opportunities to keep buying, so you don't need to do it all in one go, but certainly my own timing is to buy seeds before Christmas and now, and have a good list going. But what I've found this year, and it's worth people bearing in mind, is a lot of the smaller, more ethical companies are finding that they've got staff that are furloughed at the moment, and they're working to COVID restrictions, so they've got less people packing seeds. It's taken a bit longer. So I find that certainly the companies that I use have had closed windows of when you can order. So they'll say things like, we're opening at 8 a.m. on Monday, and the moment we've reached so many orders, we're shutting down for the whole week so we can pack them. That's something for people to just be aware of if they are buying from a smaller seed producer. There are delays at the moment. The stock seems to be there, but I don't think it will be with the amount of people who seem to be trying to buy. So it's time. It's a lovely time, but then it's snowy outside, and it's great to sit in a warm house looking through catalogues and thinking, of what am I going to have? So now's the time to get on with it. And one of the things to bear in mind is, if you have an organic garden and you don't want to use chemicals or pesticides that affect wildlife, is to remember that most seed that's not organic will have been coated in a fungicide. And if you've got children, especially, picking up little seeds covered in pesticide and chemicals is not very nice, but it's also going to be on those seeds. So although, we tend to think about buying organic food, at the end of it, start out, if you want organic, then buy organic seed to begin with, and that will naturally start to steer towards some of the more ethical producers. You can buy big organic seeds from big companies and big mainstream companies, but there are lots of smaller providers. And the one thing I would say is, we're all talking about pollination and bees at the moment and how important that is. I think bearing in mind to get some seeds that are what we call real seeds, and not necessarily an F1 seed, which has been an F1 seed's one that won't, if you sow it, you're not going to get the original plant back at all. It's going to just be useless to you. Whereas if you get a real seed, as long as you don't let it cross-pollinate with something else, you can reproduce the thing that you came up with originally. So that's something for people to bear in mind, is to perhaps go for a seed that's an ethical seed. So just typing into the internet in a search, if you typed in that you want a real or ethical seed, you will start to find companies that do that. And as I say, most of them are organic because they already recognise that's the way forward. So we do use a lovely company. I don't think anybody'd mind me saying we use real seeds at Cae Rhug, just because I'll hold up a packet. People will probably know the packets. I know Lucy's put them out on her page ages ago. That's an example of one company. There are others, but they're a lovely company because they grow the stuff in Wales and trial it. So we want stuff that will grow. When you buy a packet from a big seed producer, often those seeds are going to go out to the whole of Europe. So they're not necessarily going to grow well where we live. So if you're finding somebody who's producing seed in Wales, the chances are it's growing in Wales and they're gathering the seed there. That is what you're really aiming for, or maybe nearby into England, but you want the same sort of temperatures and conditions to know that seed's going to do well. And also the advice on their pages is often really good advice. It'll tell you when you can sow it far more accurately than a packet that's aimed as a broadsheet of where you can put it across Europe. So when you look at those seed packets and you see that you can sow it from January right the way through to June, that might be because it genuinely grows in those conditions, and that's fine. But it might also be saying that, well, if you live down south, you could sow it in January, but if you live in the Outer Hebrides, I'd probably hold up for it. And you've got to start using your own knowledge there and taking it forward.
Quite different conditions there, aren't they?
Absolutely. And even locally, there are huge differences. Just a little bit further away from us, we're in Gwynaffield. My Savin, not very far away, is usually 1 to 2 degrees colder. Rhythm is 1 to 2 degrees warmer.
Gosh.
Their frosts are quite different. When frost and ice hit, we can be having rain here. My dad will drive up to my savin. It'll 9 times out of 10 in the winter be snowing or sleeting. It's much, much colder up there than it is here. And likewise in Ruthin, we can have horrible weather here and find that Ruthin is doing great. I talk to people in Ruthin and they say, I've sown such and such and had it outside for ages. And I'm looking and thinking, I'm glad I haven't, because I've got frost. So getting to know where you live and what's good for your garden, even just in mould, I can think of areas within mould which get a lot of frost and areas in mould where I never see frost. So know your own garden, know what it's like, and know your own frost dates. Keep a note each year. It's that whole thing I think I mentioned last time. Keep a journal. Write down what does well for you. Write down when you sow something.
Because it's easy to forget, isn't it? And I think you need to be doing that. Journaling it as you go is such a good idea.
And it helps you when you get to this stage and you're buying your seeds. So, for example, for me, we are redoing the CSA this year, which is our community supported agriculture scheme. And that's very different to me growing for myself, because I'm looking for crops that I can space out to make sure the public have got a steady supply of veg. And I went back to my journals and looked and I went, well, I know I sowed this. I can remember I sowed this in February. Why is it when I go on these seed catalogues, I can't find the right thing to sow then? I was able to look at what variety it was that I sowed. Then I was able to Google and find that particular variety of seed. And sure enough, it can be sown in February. But it changes what's popular. The seed catalogues get full of the latest seeds. They get all exciting pictures of something that's been discovered. But sometimes if you've got something that grows well for you, you want that particular thing. And going through the journals is so important. I've learned so much over the years from my past notes. And every year I say I'm going to do even better, though, because I wish I did down X, Y, and Z as well. So, get into a habit of doing that. It's a lovely thing to do anyway. You know, when you've just had a session sowing seeds, pop back into the house, sit down with tea and write what you've just done. Keep track of it. Yeah. When you're sowing your seeds, write on the label when you sowed them. Don't just say what they are, and do write the variety. Some varieties will do well for you and some won't, and it won't be the same for everybody. You know, minor differences in your soil or your aspect of your garden make a huge difference, and you need to learn that individually. You can't get that out of a book. You can get, if you're on a lot with neighbours, that's good, but individual gardens have different little microclimates and they make a big difference. And if you know what grows well for you, and if you maybe even save your own seed, you start to get stronger and healthier plants, and that's what you're aiming for.
Oh, that's such brilliant advice. And I think that the idea of journaling is just such a lovely activity. And you know, I know we enjoy gardening, absolutely, and it's such a cathartic experience as well, isn't it? It just feels like it's almost experiments in your own back garden. You don't quite know what's going to come out next year, but the more you write down, the more that you can kind of test those experiments out.
Absolutely. And you don't have to just keep it to what you've sown. I love looking back at our journals because they say things like, yes, he was playing with Bob the Builder in the garlic bed and dug up the garlic. And although it's not really that relevant to where the garlic was sown all the time, it fills you with that joy that, you know, this is a family thing and it's been going on for years, and that their knowledge is building. Put in all the lovely stuff, make the journal something that when you look back on, it's an absolute pleasure to read, but it's full of all that stuff, because then the next generation are going to pick that up one day and read it and go, I want to grow, I want to do this, I did this when I was a kid. So I think that's another valuable part of it.
Absolutely. I think that's wonderful advice. Thank you. So if we come on to then what we should be sowing between now and the end of March, if you could give us a little bit of an insight into what we should be doing, that'd be brilliant.
Okay, well, we're coming to the end of January now, which is not a bad thing, because of January is pretty much, for most of us and most of the setups we've got, a no-go for sowing. There's very little you can get off. The time you start to get into February, depending on whether you've got an area of cover like a greenhouse and somewhere you can bring on things, then you might be able to start. So we'll be starting next month putting in some things like broad beans. I'll be doing brassicas and some salad crops. And they'll be going out from germinating indoors in warmth out to the house, to the greenhouse. So I'll just get them started and then I will transition them off. They'll be covered in fleece. Some people have got the luxury of a bit of heat in their greenhouse. Now, if they've got heat in their greenhouse, then that's going to make it quite a good time for them. But if you are thinking of sowing now on a windowsill, and then trying to plant out in a few weeks' time, it's not going to work very well because the plants can be just too cold at the moment to go out. And the leap between the inside temperature of the house to going outside is going to be too much of a shock. Yeah. So you're looking at trying to narrow that gap. And what you don't want, what lots of people find, and I do it, I still fall into the trap, is I go, I really want a good long growing season. I'm going to sow nice and early this year. And you sow and you put them on your windowsills and they germinate wonderfully and you get so excited and you can see them growing. And then they grow and they get longer and weedier and thinner. And you know you've messed up, because what's happening is that plant's getting weaker. They're going to damp off, which is where the roots start to give a bit. They get floppy and they fall over. They're constantly fighting for the light and stretching themselves. What you end up with is a weak plant. When it goes out, it might survive, but it isn't going to be as strong against all the slugs, the snails, the fungal disease. It isn't going to grow as well and give you as good a crop as if you just held off a couple of weeks. Yeah. So a couple of weeks later and got a plant that grew fast but strong with it. Those are the plants that are going to survive all those things we're going to throw at them in an organic environment. So that's just, everybody's going to work out when their sowing dates are around what they've got. If they've got a good sunny windowsill and it's south facing, they're going to be able to grow better on that windowsill compared to me with a west facing windowsill, which is okay. It's not the worst face, but they still will try and turn to the sun all the time. There are ways that we can help. We can, if you're trying to grow on a windowsill, you can put a foil sheet behind it. If you get a piece of card, cover it with some tin foil and place it on the house side, the inside of it, so that the light is reflecting back. You can even it up. But still, most importantly, just don't sow too early. So as we go into February, you can get some broad beans in, and they're going to cope if you've got a greenhouse. You can get some of the summer growing brassicas, so like your summer cabbage and the cauliflower, things like that you can get in. It's not time to sow sprouting broccoli or sprouts. We can leave those to later in the year. So you're very much tied. Go by the individual varieties that you've chosen. So when you're choosing your seed, choose things that work for you and your setup, and have a look on their packets. And then, most importantly, read around. Don't just go by that packet. Read something like the RHS sites, Gardener's World, anything you find. Read lots and lots of sites around that variety and work out when you're going to sow. And take it from there and adjust according to your situation. And then again, in your journal, you can say, I did this a bit early this year. Note to self, next year, a few weeks later. It's always a bit of a gamble. We're always trying to extend our growing season in the UK. We really want to get the most of our fruit. And we have some years that are so mild that we could actually plant out quite safely in March. And you're there going, oh, I wish I'd sown earlier. But we have frequently got years where we're under ice and snow, or even in May when we want to be planting things out, we've got hard frost still. So we have to juggle that, and it's all about getting to know your site, protecting things. If you do end up putting them out and you have a cold spell, throwing a bit of fleece over them so that they're protected from the frost, at least a little bit, and working on that. So we have got that sort of February leading in. Now, by the time you get to March, we've got to make a start on some of the crops. So if you're thinking about growing tomatoes and aubergines and cucumbers in a greenhouse, then that's an ideal time to sow between mid-March and the end of March. Get those seeds in. They've then got a few weeks on the windowsill before they can transition to the greenhouse, and the greenhouse will be warm enough. If you're going to put those outside, hold off a little bit longer. It does narrow your growing season, but they won't be able to cope on your windowsill long enough without getting too tall. So they would just be held off a little bit more. Now, it would be too long for me to list all the things that you could start to grow in March. There's plenty out there, and they're very much different varieties. So again, go on the internet, have a look, work out what you'd like to sow, what you want to grow in your space, and find out for yourself. Keep yourself a little thing. Get one of the calendars. Calendars are cheap at the moment, and you can get the ones with a little daily breakdown and write when you're going to sow. And then next to it, you can revisit and say whether it did well. That can be put into your journal later in the year. You can sit back down and look through week by week what you did. You can also put it back out on a different bit of the house where it's not on show that you've got an out-of-date calendar, but it's still going to give you rough sowing times for what you did, and you can move them along. So I keep old calendars for that reason, because they've got all my information on them, and I use that along with the journal, and the two feed into each other. end of March and April and May, you're sowing quite busily, but I know we'll come to that later in the year. But for now, buy your seeds, work out what you want to be growing for the year.
Yeah.
Get your big bulky order in, and then sit down and work out what's going to work for you. Do yourself a little bit of a plan and be cautious of where, don't worry if somebody else says, oh, I've put my tomatoes in. They might have that heated greenhouse. If you're growing outside, just hold off.
It's so lovely to see the enthusiasm as well that you have for doing this, which is just wonderful. It's infectious. It really is, Rachel.
Oh, I do love it, and I love teaching people about it. But what I do say to everybody is, it's one of those things that you have good years and bad years. Don't ever have a failure and think it's you, because it could be anything. It could be seed that you bought that wasn't good in how it's been stored before it came to you. It could be a bad year temperature wise. There's always so many things to learn with growing. But what's lovely is you get a fresh start at it over and over and over. And you do learn.
Do you have any advice? So we've talked a lot about what people should be getting in, looking at the seeds, getting prepared for when we can start, propagating or sowing out late when it's a little bit later and a bit more mild. But what about people who've maybe never done this before? Is there one or two kind of standout things that maybe they should try first, maybe before they get a bit too adventurous with things?
Grow something you want to grow. And it sounds really daft, but we can all look in catalogues and see things that are really exciting and then actually end up with a crop we don't eat. Grow something you want to eat. Don't get drawn into things like melons and kiwi fruits and exotics, because you might, with some of the new varieties, pull it off, but they're going to be pretty tricky and they're not going to give you a big yield. So depending on what your setup is, you could be new to gardening but with a big plot. You could be new to gardening with a small plot. But there are some vegetables that are just a bit easier than others. So you want to be perhaps trying something like runner beans, which, as long as you can avoid the early slugs and snails and get good, strong, healthy plants, you get a big crop in a very small amount of space. And there's not a lot that goes wrong with something like that. That's quite a nice one. If you've got children wanting to grow something they're going to want to eat that's going to really inspire them. So for me, there's nothing beats the taste of peas, fresh garden peas, which are absolutely gorgeous. I spent my time in the pea patch, so that thing like that. But then it's the same family, the legume family. They're quite an easy one to start with. They don't always take up, depending on the varieties you go for, they don't take up a lot of space for the crop yield that you're getting, and there's relatively little pest and disease to go with them. So they would be quite reasonable ones to go for. Trying to think. Most of the brassicas are really prone to getting eaten by caterpillars, which isn't a problem. They're not hard to grow, but you do get crop protection for them. Things like courgettes, they're brilliant to start with. Again, you've got a seed that's nice and big to handle for a child, or for anybody struggling with their eyes or their dexterity, to pick up, drop in a pot. They mostly germinate. They're really good germinators. They cope with a huge amount of sort of moving around and doing things weird, and you get lots coming. So it's quite a nice, rewarding one. But I'd only grow that if you want to eat it. A lot of people kind of go,
I think that's the best advice, though, isn't it? Grow something that you know that when it's, if it grows successfully, you're going to have a crop of something that you're going to enjoy. And I think that's the best advice that we can give people. So I think it's just about, as you say, getting your seeds in, deciding what you want to grow, and getting prepared really over the next few weeks.
But get it covered up with something to warm it up. So if you've got a piece of black plastic this time of year, and you can put it over your soil, peg it down, it will blow away. That's going to start to heat your soil up. You're looking, by the time you put your seeds out later in the year, when you're actually sowing seeds, not planting plants, you need your soil to feel warm. And are you ready for this? He used to say, put your bare bum in the soil, and if it felt comfortable and you didn't squeal, then it's warm. So now that would be really funny to see. I'm not sure if I'm going to go for that.
I think maybe that's a social challenge in itself.
Maybe on the underside of your arm, and just see if that soil has got the temperature. But we can cheat a little bit by putting something like black plastic. We can raise that temperature up, and it also protects the soil a little bit from any of the harsh weather. So if we get heavy rain, so you can, and it's stopping weeds germinating, it's stopping lots of things going on. So it's a great thing to do, to get your beds covered and get them warmed up ready.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rachel. It's been a pleasure to talk to you again, and join us again. Thanks, Rachel.
Okay, you're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.